50% higher than healthcare over the last 20 years. Why is that? Because government is involved in upper education. And what happens is, a school says, here's our tuition. And the government then, the politicians in Washington said, well, you know, next year we need to increase the budget. So the school does what? They're going to increase what we're going to give each student. The school's going to raise tuition. Increase what we give each student. The school's going to raise tuition. I own a small business. If I knew of all the home builders in the country were going to get a bigger check from the United States government, we would increase our prices every single year as well. So I have no problem loaning students money. I think that's a good use for a loan, but we ought to make sure that they pay that loan back, and we ought to keep it very competitive, very low interest rates.
Mr. Lange?
Well, this issue hits home to me. I have a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 5-year-old, and my 5-year-old is going to start kindergarten this fall, and I know here in Iowa, especially in our small town of Independence, we have a great education system. We have great teachers, we have great administrators, and I know they care deeply about educating our children. But I assure you, there is no one that cares more about the education of our children more than my wife in the front row here and myself. And the reason for that is because we're the parents. We're the parents of the children. And as a result of that, there needs to be a whole shift downwards in the educational philosophy here in the United States, from the federal level to the state level. The state level to the local level. And why is that? Why do we want to shift it downward? Because the people that are closest to the children care most about the children. And in fact, to show the example, try contacting your local school board member. It's pretty easy. You get on the phone, look it up in the phone book, and you can reach them. Try contacting your state representative. You can reach them. Try contacting someone out in Washington, D.C. in the Department of Education. It's pretty difficult. That's why we have to have the shift downward in policy. And I think it also comes down to the expense. Since 1960, we have doubled the expense per pupil on students. And with what results? We haven't seen the results. The question isn't more resources, because I tell you what, Bruce Braley will not beat me on this issue. There is no one that cares more about educating our children than myself.
But we are not going to lose on it by saying we want to cut funding. It's not a matter of just cutting funding. It's a matter of shifting funding to the decision makers that care most about educating our children. I want to take it a step farther, secondary education, above K through 12.
Because I know I'm one of them. I had to finance my college education. I'm still paying it back to this day.
The fact is, we need to encourage savings for college, not debt financing it. And how do we do that? We reform 529 plans. We allow individuals so that they can reduce their taxable income so that when they spend it on education, that's a tax savings for them.
Mr. Blum?
I coached a young man at Duke Senior High School. He became an orphan because his father was murdered his name's Malcolm, murdered in a drug deal in the south side of Chicago. His mother died of cervical cancer at 42. Malcolm came from inner city Chicago, and in the 6th grade, when he came to Dubuque, he could not read. Okay, so there we have serious issues, particularly in our bigger cities, in public education. And there's so many wonderful examples. I'd be all for charter schools. I think we need to give the consumers, parents, choice. And I would be for charter schools and a voucher system. You take your voucher and send your children to any schools you would like, including religious or faith-based schools.
All right, thank you. Mr. Lange, we start. All right, thank you. Mr. Lange, we start with you again. This time, we're talking about foreign policy. And the question is, President Bush was criticized by the left for entering into 2 wars as president, and President Obama has been criticized for taking action in Libya and also for not taking action in Syria. Now, in your view, what role should the United States play in foreign conflicts in general?
Well, I think we need to get our foreign policy right. And what I mean by that is I would rather have a dictatorship that hates us. I would rather have a democracy that loves us, but we can't always have that. So the point being is we have to put forward policy that encourages democracy all across the world. Because if we continue to support dictators that don't share the same interests as we do, as Americans, then we run into problems. And I can tell you, I just stood in Tiberias on the border of Israel and Syria, looking across the Sea of Galilee, looking at the Golan Heights. Right then and there, in the middle of the Middle East, we are seeing a democracy grow. They are the only democracy in the middle of the Middle East, right there in Israel. And we need to support that. But we support that not by nation building. we support that by encouraging our foreign policy to match our ideals. Because we are the beacon. We are the city on the hill. And we need to make sure that our foreign policy matches that. And what we do is no longer continue to support dictators, and we use that examples in Egypt, in Libya, and really the question becomes, is there a threat to our national security? Is there a threat to our homeland? And if there isn't, then we need to be much more cautious about sending our men and women out into harm's way. I have a gentleman, the guest of mine here in the debate, an Army Ranger, served in Afghanistan. He served overseas. We want to make sure when we send them over there, we have a direct mission. It's a cause that can be completed.
I think our military in the United States, since it is one of the enumerated powers given the federal government by our Constitution to protect us, I think our military should be the strongest, the best equipped, and the best trained military in the entire world. My father quit high school in the 10th grade, lied about his age, and went and fought in World War II, joined the United States Navy. My brother did 3 tours of duty in Vietnam in the Marine Corps. And my stepdaughter Autumn was in the United States Army. So I appreciate military. They're true American heroes. Whenever I see a man or a woman in uniform in an airport or whatever, I go out of my way to go and shake their hand and thank them for their service. Now, with that being said, I also believe in the Constitution. And every war since World War II that we have been involved in is an unconstitutional war. I believe Congress should have to declare war. We put too much power in the chief executive officer, the President of the United States. We give him too much power. And he can send our young men and young women in harm's way without a vote of Congress. I do not agree with that. I do not agree we should be in the nation-building business. I respect other countries' sovereignty, just like they should respect ours. We should not have feet on the street, boots on the ground in foreign nations and go on these wild goose chases of nation-building. And it should, once again, if we're going to war, it should be by a vote of Congress. Make it a constitutional war. And ultimately, if I'm in Congress, the way I will decide to vote on war or not is this. I will sit and think about my sons and my daughter and say, if I knew they were going to go to faraway land and die, is it worth it? That is the litmus test I would use. Because I think it's far too easy to send someone else's children to die.
Mr. Lange, 30 seconds.
Well, I do agree with that. And, under Article 1, the Congress does have the power to declare war. But in the situation with Libya, with President Obama, he went there without getting authorization from the Congress, which is a clear contrast from President Bush under the authorization for use of military force. So there's a clear contrast in the authority that one president chose to get, that one president chose to consult with our elected officials and our representatives and our senators, and President Obama chose not to do that with Libya. And more importantly, there was no threat to our homeland when President Obama chose to use military force in Libya.
Gentlemen, you're doing a wonderful job watching the time, I have to say. You're making, I get you in line, but you're just not giving me the opportunity, so.
I'll love it. See what happens.
I'm truly just kidding. You're doing a good job. Okay, Mr. Blum, we start with you for this next question. No, this is another foreign policy question. The United States, of course, is Israel's oldest and staunchest ally. What do you believe should be the future of our relationship with Israel, and to what extent should we stand with them or shy away from them on the world stage?
Yes, Israel is obviously our strongest ally in a very unstable Middle East. There's no question about that. And typically these days, when you talk about Israel, it's always in relation to a nuclear-enabled Iran. That's the way I typically hear it when when I'm traveling to the first district in eastern Iowa here. Benjamin Netanyahu recently came to the United States, and he said before Congress, he said, you don't need a nation built in Israel. We're already a nation. He said, you don't need to defend us. We already have a strong army and air force. And trust me, they do. They can defend themselves. They're very, very tough, strong army and air force. So we don't need to get involved from a military standpoint defending Israel. They can take care of themselves. A good friend of mine is the former press secretary to Benjamin Netanyahu. I had a 3-hour coffee with him last month, and he said the same thing. We don't need to be involved from a military standpoint, boots on the ground, okay, with Iran. They can handle the problem themselves. So, there's 9 countries in the world that have nuclear weapons. 9. Do we want 29, 39, 49 countries to have nuclear weapons? Obviously not. But every time someone starts building one, is the United States of America going to go to war with them? I would hope not. We need to, well, my time's running out. We need to keep doing the negotiations that we're doing with Iran and keep pursuing the sanctions. If it doesn't work, trust me, Israel's going to take care of the problem themselves.
Mr. Lange, a full 2 minutes.
Well, as I mentioned, standing on that border with Jordan in Israel, with Syria in Israel, you can see that these people live under constant threat all day long. Every single day, 50,000 missiles pointed at them at any moment. And as a result of that, they have come to choose democracy. They have come to choose that they want to stay in the Middle East under that threat, regardless of what happens. And why? Because they believe in the freedom, because they believe in the cause as to why they're there. And I go back to what I stated earlier. I would much rather have a democracy that hates us than a dictatorship that loves us. And why is that? Because when someone can go down to their town square in the middle of the Middle East and shout out everything that they hate about their particular regime or their particular government, and not get drug off, not get shot at, not get beat down, that's when we know democracy is succeeding. Our foreign policy must match up with our ideals, with our values, with our beliefs. I think that's the clear contrast. And I think there's also a point to be made that we don't have to send military troops overseas at any potential threat to Israel, because, as my opponent pointed out, Israel can take care of themselves. They have a vibrant army. In fact, they have a requirement of army service at the age of 18. And so they have a nation that is set on defending themselves. We just need to let them know that we support their ideals, we support their freedom, and we will not back down. Not from a terrorist like Iran, not from anyone else, Al-Qaeda or the Taliban or anyone else. No one will threaten America. We will stand up regardless because of what we stand for, and that is freedom across the world.